What if the ocean could erase a crime before anyone knew it happened? In 1990, a Royal Navy submarine collided with a small fishing boat, and within seconds, the sea swallowed it whole. No warning, no mayday, just silence. This isn't fiction. It's the true story of the Antares Disaster, when power met innocence and the ocean decided who would speak and who would disappear. It was 2:19 a.m. when a metallic sound rippled through the submarine's hull, like thunder trapped underwater. The crew looked at each other, trying to decipher the echo that seemed to come from everywhere at once, a faceless warning. Seconds later, the vibration stopped, and the sea returned to its ancient silence. None of them knew that this sound would mark the beginning of the Antares Disaster. Above the surface, seasoned fishermen felt their boat sway in a strange rhythm. The radio hissed, ropes tightened, and something invisible pulled the trawler as if the sea had come alive. Within minutes, confusion turned to panic. An unknown force was dragging the ship toward a fate no one could see, but everyone could feel. Then came silence, no distress calls, no lights on the horizon, only the calm of an ocean pretending it had seen nothing. Hours later, the lost trawler mystery began circulating through ports and newspapers, while the Royal Navy incident remained shrouded in fog. How could something like this happen in such calm waters? That question would echo for years along the coasts of the United Kingdom. As the Antares sailed quietly, its for fishermen lived the routine they had known since youth. The sound of waves hitting the hull, the smell of diesel mixed with salt, and laughter shared between cigarettes, all part of a craft passed from father to son. That night, the sea was an old friend, and no one imagined that this same friend would hide a maritime tragedy. A few meters below, HMS Trenchant moved like a metallic shadow, filled with protocols, hierarchies, and secrets. It was the opposite of the fishing boat, steel against wood, technology against instinct. The submarine followed precise maneuvers, part of a Royal Navy incident training exercise, where silence wasn't a choice, it was law. Neither world knew their paths were about to cross. It's strange how the sea connects the simple and the sophisticated, the man who seeks fish and the one who seeks perfection. Both believed they were in control until fate decided to test who was really listening. And on that cold night, the ocean chose no sides. It simply watched, silent, as their paths converged unnoticed. In the cold corridors of HMS Trenchant, the perisher course was more than training. It was a test of nerves, reputation, and survival. They said only the coldest minds passed, and that even a small mistake could end a career. Of 6 officers on trial, 4 had already quit, crushed by the pressure of an environment where every decision could turn into a submarine collision. The instructor, a veteran with 18 years of experience, watched in silence. He believed mastery of command came from instinct and discipline, not luck. He saw the sea as a chessboard and every maneuver as a calculated move. But no one teaches how to react when the board changes without warning, and that's exactly what would make the Antares Disaster possible. Confidence is a double-edged sword. It keeps a crew united, but can also blind them to invisible danger. That night, the Royal Navy's strictest training would be tested in a way no manual could predict. Because, in truth, a commander's greatest enemy isn't the sea, it's the certainty he already controls it. The Antares was small but brave, a wooden trawler guided by men who treated the sea like family. The captain, 36, knew every curve of the current and every wind that whispered of change. For 3 years, he commanded that vessel with the pride of someone tending to his own home. For them, the ocean was routine, not risk, livelihood, not sentence. Cold nights were filled with radio chatter, laughter, and the clink of tools. They talked about fishing, football, their children, and how the weather seemed too good to be true. They were ordinary men, far from the glory of the Royal Navy incident, yet with knowledge no radar could measure. And perhaps that's why the maritime tragedy hit so hard. When the sea changes its mood, even veterans grow small. Danger rarely warns. That night, the sea was gentle, smooth as glass, calm as prayer. The lost trawler mystery was born in a scene that didn't shout danger, only whispered irony, for fishermen trusting what they knew too well. Because sometimes what makes us feel safe is what blinds us to what's coming. While the world slept, HMS Trenchant slid beneath Scotland's cold waters like a silent blade. The crew had finished part of a naval exercise, and the submarine was changing course to begin a new maneuver. Everything followed protocol, but the sea rarely warns when something slips out of order. It was at that moment that the Antares Disaster began to unfold, not with a crash, but with a simple decision. The sonar operator detected multiple signals and dismissed them as noise from a distant vessel. A logical assumption, born of repetition and training, but one that left the submarine blind to real danger. The captain, exhausted, stepped away to rest, certain his crew could handle things. No one noticed that, deep below, the ocean was about to move its pieces. In that almost invisible moment, fate shifted. The depth stirred, but the silence of the equipment masked the error. A simple misreading would ignite a submarine collision the naval world would never forget. And in the instant command changed hands, fate changed course. That line would echo like an epitaph across the entire maritime tragedy that followed. The Antares sailed peacefully until something changed in the sea's texture. The nets tightened as if caught by an unseen giant. The captain reacted, he accelerated, shouted orders, pulled the ropes, but the boat wouldn't respond. It was like fighting a force that came from below, cold and impersonal. Without knowing it, those men were now part of a submarine collision unfolding in silence. 60 meters below, inside HMS Trenchant, a metallic screech cut the air. The sonar operator hesitated, alarms flashed, but no one knew what had been struck. Strange contact, someone muttered. Within seconds, the room filled with short orders and held breaths. Meanwhile, the lost trawler mystery played out above in a tragic dance between steel and wood. In the darkness, the fishermen tried to break windows, start engines, shout for help. But the sea is quick to swallow voices. One final pull, and everything went still. No waves, no light, no sound. The ocean reset itself, as if nothing had happened. In that instant, the Antares Disaster stopped being an accident and became a secret shared between man and abyss. When HMS Trenchant surfaced, the captain raised the periscope and scanned the horizon. Two boats in the distance appeared to be following their routes, and nothing seemed wrong. The crew believed the metallic sound was just a harmless echo. The sea looked calm, complicit. No one suspected that only a few miles away, one of the quietest maritime tragedies in the Royal Navy incident was being written. As the submarine resumed the exercise, thick cables wrapped silently around its hull. They were the remains of Antares nets, the only trace of a meeting that should never have happened. The sound of metal scraping steel was muffled by the roar of engines, and the mission continued. Protocol won over instinct, and silence won over doubt. The sea pretended normality, covering human error with deceptive calm. On the surface, the night remained untouched, as if the ocean had swallowed the truth on purpose. The sea swallowed the truth and gave back only silence. The phrase would echo as both judgment and epitaph of the Antares Disaster, while the world slept, unaware that everything had changed. When the sun rose, the sea looked the same, serene, immaculate, indifferent. But by morning, nearby fishermen spotted oil slicks and fragments of wood floating in the distance. Radios crackled with brief, nervous exchanges. That's how the lost trawler mystery began to take shape, between rumors and a silence that could no longer be ignored. Royal Navy helicopters swept the area, and divers found the Antares more than 150 meters deep. The vessel was intact but upside down, as if dragged and left to sleep on the seabed. Inside, time had stopped. While officials traded reports and theories, families waited for news that would never come. The maritime tragedy was no longer speculation, it was loss. The official statements were cold, almost mechanical. No signs of survivors, for words that said everything and nothing at once. While the Navy searched for answers, families searched for voices that would never return. And amid that emotional abyss, trust in the sea's silence finally began to crumble. The Royal Navy's technical report later revealed that the sonar had merged two separate contacts into one. A minor reading, an imprecise distance calculation, and fate was sealed. It's ironic how a machine built to see the invisible can go blind precisely when it's needed most. And that's how the Antares disaster turned from routine into ruin, through trust pushed too far. The submarine's crew wasn't careless, only human. Fatigue, training pressure, and the belief that everything was under control, small factors that, combined, create the greatest tragedies. Technology fails, but pride fails first. It's a lesson beyond the sea. Every time we believe something is infallible, we're one step away from proving it wrong. As experts reviewed data, protocols, and recordings, an uncomfortable truth surfaced. The Maritime Tragedy wasn't an isolated event, but the result of a system that trusted machines more than men. Technology is infallible until someone believes in it too much. That night, the phrase ceased to be metaphor and became epitaph. After the Antares disaster, the Royal Navy revised its protocols with surgical precision. New minimum distance rules between submarines and fishing vessels were introduced, and communication systems received extra safeguards. It was the kind of change born of regret, not prevention. Each new rule was, in a way, an attempt to speak with the past. Investigations showed that if a simple route warning had been issued, the lost trawler mystery might never have happened. But the sea is a cruel teacher. It teaches only after loss. The Royal Navy incident became a symbol of how discipline can coexist with negligence. Sometimes blind obedience to protocol blinds common sense itself. The bitter truth is that these measures came too late. The fishermen's names were already carved on gravestones, and their families watched bureaucracy turn grief into paperwork. Every new rule was written at the cost of 4 lives. That line, whispered in naval corridors, became the reminder that no technology should ever need. Years after the Antares disaster, a small plaque was placed on the Cardale Pier, facing the sea. Names engraved in bronze, silence heavier than 1,000 speeches. Fishermen passing by touched the metal before setting sail, a simple, almost ritualistic gesture, as if asking the ocean for permission. That's how the maritime tragedy lives on, not in books, but in daily gestures. Life went back to normal, boats returned to fishing, but the sea remembers. Those who live by the water know it has memory. And every time a wave breaks on the pier, it seems to repeat a story the wind insists on whispering. Not everything the sea takes, it gives back. The lost trawler mystery stopped being an isolated case. It became a collective reminder that silence has a voice. Today, that stretch of coast is more than a harbor. It's an open memorial. Children run along the pier unaware of its weight, while old fishermen gaze at the horizon with eyes that have seen too much. And every time a boat departs, the sea watches in silence, remembering what it once took and what it might take again. For weeks, the Royal Navy incident remained wrapped in secrecy. Restricted reports, careful statements, and a deliberate absence of accountability. It was the culture of silence, the kind that protects reputations but buries truths. The Antares disaster made one thing clear: sometimes the greatest danger isn't in the depths of the sea, but in the depths of bureaucracy. Institutional silence works like a curtain. It prevents scandal, but blocks learning. And while families waited for answers, the gears of naval hierarchy turned slowly, trying to turn tragedy into statistics. That delay cost trust, empathy, and the Navy's credibility itself. At sea, silence is golden, but that night, it costs lives. This pattern isn't unique to the military. It echoes in companies, governments, even within ourselves. How many times do we stay silent just to avoid admitting a mistake? The lost trawler mystery is, at its core, a mirror of every system that fears the discomfort of truth. Because the price of silence, sooner or later, is always paid in humanity. Sonar, the ocean's invisible ear, was born from fear. It listens where eyes cannot see, turning echoes into certainty. But on the night of the Antares disaster, that same ear confused sound with shadow. What seemed like surface noise was actually the signal of disaster forming below. Ironic, the more man trusts technology, the more deaf he becomes to instinct. For many operators, sonar feels like an extension of consciousness. Every beep, every echo is a conversation between man and sea. But that night, communication failed, not through malfunction, but through overconfidence. The Royal Navy incident proved that hearing is not the same as listening. Listening requires humility, and in rigid hierarchies, that sense is often the first to disappear. Reports mention operators admitting they felt something odd in the signals but didn't dare speak up. Hierarchy is efficient but rarely sensitive. And between sound and shadow, the lost trawler mystery found space to exist, a reminder that even in the deepest waters, danger often speaks softly. Being a submarine commander means carrying the weight of dozens of lives inside a steel capsule where every decision can become history. In the Royal Navy incident, that weight was constant, invisible, and often lonely. A commander must balance calm and precision even when everything inside him wants to scream. It's a pressure no report can show, only the eyes of someone who sleeps little and thinks too much. During the Antares disaster, that psychological burden revealed its cruelest side. Training taught officers to stay composed, but no one prepared them for guilt. Leading in extreme environments is a battle against one's own humanity, and the more rigid the mind, the more fragile it becomes when the impossible happens. Training for the impossible is easy until it happens. Studies on decision-making under stress show that human error rarely comes from ignorance. It comes from emotional exhaustion. The same pattern is seen in pilots, surgeons, and investors in crisis. They all make choices based on the confidence that once protected them until it destroys them. And at that fragile boundary between control and collapse, tragedies like the lost trawler mystery find their space. The sea is neither villain nor accomplice, only witness. It observes, absorbs, and returns everything in silence. In the Antares disaster, it was stage and graveyard, mirror and judge. The waves erase traces, but not stories. Every drop that touches Scotland's coast still carries a fragment of that moment when human life collided with the unforeseen. Poets say the sea mirrors the soul. Perhaps that's why it unsettles us. The more we look, the more we see what we'd rather not. In this maritime tragedy, it reflected human arrogance, fear, and remorse with a calm that borders on cruelty. The sea doesn't judge, it only shows what was done and lets time decide the rest. Some days it is a tomb, others a mirror. Maybe that duality is what makes it both fascinating and feared. The lost trawler mystery doesn't belong only to reports. It belongs to the ocean, which never forgets what it's been given. The sea is the true archive of history, and within it, every silence is testimony. The Antares disaster left more than reports and reforms. It left a silent warning. Within the Royal Navy, the case became a study in how overconfidence can disguise itself as competence. Routes, protocols, and training changed, but the true legacy was psychological, the reminder that the sea tolerates no distractions, not even from the world's greatest naval powers. In command schools, the episode became required study. Instructors cite it as a symbol of humility before the unpredictable. The sea doesn't teach through words, it teaches through loss. That phrase gained weight among officers, reminding them that discipline without sensitivity is just rigidity. The maritime tragedy became a manual of conscience, a reminder that to lead is, above all, to listen. And even decades later, the lost trawler mystery is still told among sailors and fishermen. Not as a story of blame, but of understanding. Because the true legacy of tragedy isn't what was destroyed, but what was learned. In the end, the sea keeps teaching, patiently, those who still dare to challenge it. The Antares disaster was more than a Royal Navy incident. It was a reminder that even in silence, the ocean keeps score. Behind every maritime tragedy, there's a decision, a delay, or a moment of pride that costs lives. And when a submarine collision drags truth into the depths, it doesn't disappear, it waits to be found. If this story made you see the sea and human error differently, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. because the next story might reveal what the ocean still refuses to give back.